right, hello everybody. Welcome to Wonder Home Podcast for today. And I meet Jens. How do you pronounce?
Lowitzsch is my last name.
Jens Lowitzsch.
That's right.
Okay. In Karachi right now, and
Yes.
we are attending a conference in IBA Karachi, and I have a conversation with Jens about the topics about the co-ownership, the prosumers, and Louis and Patricia Kelso.
That's right.
We will learn about that because their ideas are outstanding. I mean, I'm really intrigued to know about them. But before that, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, of
Who are
course.
you and what you are working on?
Yes.
Things
Okay.
like that.
So my name is Jens Lowitzsch, and I'm actually a lawyer by train.
Oh, by training is lawyer.
Yes.
Okay.
Although I teach at the Faculty of Economics,
Uh-huh.
and my work is much related to the big political questions. Actually, one of them being who should own what.
Oh, who
And
should own what?
Yes.
Okay.
And what I'm arguing is that there is no law of physics which says that ownership should be concentrated or in the hand of the few,
I see.
but actually that it probably is the reverse, that ownership should be broadened as possibly
Yes.
as large as
As
possible
possible. I
in
see.
order to give normal people also a second source of income, independently of labor.
I see.
So the average citizen only can sell his labor,
Uh-huh.
and he can only sell it once, and he has to present himself
I see.
when doing so. And of course, for the average worker, it makes a great difference whether he, for example, works in the sewers
Uh-huh.
or in a palace.
And the palace.
Whereas the capital owner
Uh-huh.
can, so to sell the income of capital
Uh-huh.
not only once but twice. So one, he or she can, if you for example own a plot of land,
Uh-huh.
you can pledge this own of land and
Okay.
take a loan on it,
Take a loan on it.
and you can still work with the land.
Okay.
So so capital ownership is totally different from owning only your labor.
Only our own labor. Okay. Before we going to the idea, how do you? I mean, you are law by training, as you mentioned,
Right.
and then how do you meet with these kind of ideas? Do you?
Yes. Okay.
What
Yes.
books that you are learning or reading, and then people, scholars that you met?
Well, of course, it is already when I was young. I was reading a lot of philosophical books, political philosophy, and all these big fundamental questions were always very important to me. But what really brought me into that direction was in the very early days of my studies. I started to study in Berlin in 1988.
1988 in Berlin.
And then in 1989, I went to Poland to continue my studies there, and that was the time when before the fall of the wall in Poland, we had the round table. Part of my family is from Poland.
Oh, part of your family is from Poland.
And so I continued my studies in Krakow at the time, and I had the opportunity as a young student to work in the Polish Ministry of Privatization.
Polish Ministry of Administration.
Privatization.
Privatization.
Yeah, privatization.
Okay.
And the reason why I got this opportunity was there was a German who was there on an exchange program of he was coming from MIT in the United States, and he didn't speak any Polish.
Okay.
And I was researching as a young student this ownership transformation in privatization, and at the time they were selling second-hand clothes in the ministry on the ground floor, so you could just walk in. That's what I did, because I thought if I want to learn about privatization, I should go to the ministry. And then they didn't know what to do with me, so they sent me to this other foreigner, which was this Klaus Hermann, this German.
Okay.
And so I interviewed him, and then because he didn't speak Polish and I did, so I became his assistant.
Okay.
And so I had the opportunity for more than 2 years to really be inside this privatization process. So to really see what happens, how the enterprises were privatized, to whom they were sold. And one of the concepts in privatization at those times was also employee buyouts.
Employee buyout. Okay.
Right, so that companies formerly state-owned companies in privatization would not be sold to investors, strategic investors or foreign investors, but actually to the employees of these companies themselves.
Oh, I see.
So the employees became the successor owners of these companies. Right. And that was the reason why I started to investigate this as a research project, to ask whether actually employee ownership is a viable solution and an alternative to selling it to foreigners or to concentrated capital. And that's where my interest for these topics actually stems from.
I see.
And then over many years, I deepened this. I wrote my doctoral dissertation about Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovak Republic. About actually.
You did your doctoral program in Poland as well? Or
no, actually, I finished it in Berlin. But I was doing my research in these three countries during my stay in Poland. And then in 1996, I think, I finally returned to Berlin, completed my studies and done my doctoral studies. And that was also more or less in these years, in 1996 or 8, when I actually met Patricia Kelso.
Okay, and what occasion you met?
We met at my first international talk in Brussels.
Okay.
And I was a young researcher. I was not on the program, but my doctoral father was, but he couldn't travel, so I substituted him, and suddenly I had the opportunity to speak in a large audience, and I was of course terribly nervous, as you can imagine.
So young scholar presenting
yes, exactly. And I was presenting my results on employee ownership.
That's your own research?
Yes, right? Yes. That was my doctoral father said, no, if you are going, you should speak about your ideas. So that's what I did, and after the talk, a lady came up to me, and it turned out that was Patricia Kelso. Patricia Kelso is the widow of Louis Kelso. And Louis Kelso, which I then learned, actually here's a picture of Louis.
This is the picture of Louis
that's
Kelso.
Louis Kelso. And on our website there's also a picture of Patricia, obviously. And so Patricia is the widow of Louis Kelso, and Louis Kelso in the 1950s, also as a lawyer,
by profession,
yes,
training is a lawyer.
Also a lawyer. He invented the leverage buyout,
called leverage buyout.
And the leverage buyout is a financing technique which enables you to acquire an enterprise using actually the object of acquisition, that very enterprise that you are buying, as collateral. So you don't have enough money to buy the company. You borrow money, but you don't have collateral for the loan. So you're using actually the object that you're buying. You're using the borrowing power of the company that you're acquiring.
Interesting.
And this technique is nowadays it's most commonly known from private equity transactions. And private equity funds use this actually to make the rich richer. Because it's well-capitalized investors who are using leverage, a lever. They borrow up to 80% of the purchase price of these companies. They acquire them, then they restructure them. They use the future profits of these companies to pay back the loan, and then they flip the company and sell it and cash out. Now, initially, and that is almost in oblivion today, Kelso invented this not to make the rich richer, but his idea was actually to broaden capital ownership.
Not only...
to enable working people who didn't have savings or who would never get a loan to acquire actually the companies that they work for. So the prototype, the first leverage buyout was an employee buyout. And only 20 years later, in the 70s, when this already had become a success, the private equity funds used this to concentrate capital. But the first leverage buyouts were actually a technique to enable poor people to become co-owners.
Co-owners of that company that they are working in. I see.
And what is also...
This really fit your previous experience during the privatization.
Yes, exactly. That's why it was all interlinked. And then when Mrs. Kelso invited me then to Vienna after this after our first meeting, and in Vienna there was a conference, SASE, where also there was a panel on Kelso's ideas. and there was a blue screen, and there was a recording from Kelso, and it was for me as a young person, almost as if he was speaking from the future to me. Oh yeah, it was really a strange situation. So there was Kelso. He was a very charismatic speaker, and he was advocating his ideas and explaining why ESOP's employee stock ownership plans. That was actually the employee. Yeah. No, sorry. ESOP. Employee stock ownership plans are ESOPs. ESOP, okay. Which enable employees to become co-owners of the companies that they work for, but Kelso also invented the CSOP, which are consumer stock ownership plans.
Consumers. First is employee and then the consumers.
Exactly. So in ESOPs, it's employees of a company, while in CSOPs, it's consumers of a utility. But the idea is similar in both cases. People who normally don't have money to buy companies become co-owners, in one case of the company that they work for, and in another case of the utility that provides general services to them.
Provide general services for the consumers for that.
And to give you an example, the first CSOP was actually implemented in 1958.
1958, where?
And that was in a CSOP in agriculture.
In agriculture.
In California, in the Central Valley, there were about 4,700 small and medium-sized farmers. And all of these farmers had the same problem. They spent around 30% of their budget to buy artificial fertilizer.
Artificial fertilizer.
And artificial fertilizer was produced basically by the petrol companies, by the big petrol companies. They had an oligopoly, 3 or 4 big companies who had divided the market. And they sold this artificial fertilizer at totally inflated prices. And the consumers were these farmers, and they came to Louis Kelso and said, actually, we are fed up with this. We want to build our own artificial fertilizer company and become prosumers.
Prosumers.
That means we are consumers who produce. We're consumers who produce what we consume. So we produce the artificial fertilizer and we consume it ourselves. In order to be independent of these big companies.
I see.
And Kelso said yes, okay, he would structure this project for them, and this was a very, very large investment at the time.
So the proposal is from these people first. And
then, they came with the problem, and he provided the solution. Right, and at the time this was an investment of first $20 million and then $100 million, so all in all $120 million in 1958, which today inflation adjusted would be $1 billion. So it was a huge project. 4,700 small farmers, and they didn't have any own capital. So this was all done with leverage again. And when the big fertilizer companies, the petrol companies, got wind of the project, they invited the farmers in buses for a free lunch to their factories to show them how dangerous artificial fertilizer production was. And of course, the farmers saw that that everything could blow up. You could produce explosives from fertilizer, and that you needed engineers and proper management. So they come back to Louis and said, "We've changed our mind. That's not our cup of tea. We can't do it." And Kelso replied, "Yes, you're absolutely right. The fertilizer companies or the petrol companies, they told you the truth, but they didn't tell you the whole truth because they couldn't, because they didn't know. And that is, I have already hired their best engineers and their best managers. So actually, we can do it."
I see.
And with that decision, they implemented the Valley Nitrogen Producer project. So they built their own fertilizer plant.
And it's successful there.
And it was successful, and the fertilizer price imploded from $250 a ton to $66.
I see.
So $184 per every ton of artificial fertilizer that was sold actually went to corporate headquarters, to the yachts of the CEOs, to public relations, whatever.
I see.
But the real price was actually 66.
66.
That was the market price, the real market price, at which now they self-produced and self-consumed.
So consumes for themselves. Okay.
So they saved a lot of money, and only after 9 years they had paid back the debt.
I see. Wow.
And when I later, when I already had engaged with the Kelsos, or with Patricia in this case, when I was visiting San Francisco and I was looking into the archives, I couldn't understand why the CSOP wasn't as successful as the ESOP. I should mention that the employee stock ownership plan was a big success. So until the 70s, there were tax incentives were introduced in the United States. Today, there's a population of roughly 10,000 ESOPs with 14.5 million of employee owners.
In the US.
In the US. And that is more than unionized employees. So and there's a whole industry that only does consultancies for ESOPs.
Sometimes when, for example, for the layman like me, having a lot of owners, it's complex, hard to handle, hard to manage, hard to have consolidation, this kind of things. How does it work?
Well, the idea behind it is that actually in these employee stock ownership plans, the employees are represented by a trustee. So their shares are in trust, and gradually they use single source financing, so they borrow money, that's the leverage effect, to buy out the owners that retire.
I see.
And over a period of 5 to 7 years, they buy around 30-40% of the company. Then in the second tranche, they buy the other 40, and eventually they become completely owners of the companies. And what I couldn't understand at the time was 10,000 ESOPs, 14.5 million employees, employee owners, but only one CSOP in history, never replicated. How could it be? And that's when I started to dig into this, and I discovered that actually it was probably the disruptiveness of the CSOP which prevented it from being replicated, because the ESOP really solves a problem, that is the business succession. So you have an owner that is reaching retirement age, but he or she doesn't have children, or the children don't want to do what their parents do, and he or she doesn't want to sell to a competitor, to close down the company, or to be gobbled up by some conglomerate. So they create their own successor, that is, they sell to their own employees. And over time, with this leverage effect, the employees, thanks to the borrowing power of the company, take on a loan, pay out the owner, pay back the loan from future earnings, not from past savings that they don't have. So it's all future earnings. And once the debt is paid off, they are actually owners of the company.
I see.
Now, with the CSOP, the story is different, because the CSOP didn't solve a problem, but it created a problem for the big concentrated capital, for the big petrol companies, because it disrupted the market, it destroyed their monopoly or their oligopoly. So, and that was when I thought, okay, maybe there's a different sector of the economy where actually CSOPs could successfully survive because they solve a problem. Because such business models are only successful if they really solve a problem. That's my theory, my thesis, or my hypothesis. Let's put it that way. And in the case of the CSOPs, the idea was to carry them into the sector of renewable energy.
To renewable energy.
Because in renewable energies, the logic of the production of renewable energy is decentral. So it's not concentrated, but it's a lot of small communities which have small production plants. And that is what finally brought us to the Horizon 2020 project SCORE. And you can also download the final report of the SCORE project on our website.
On the website, the Kelso Intitute.
Yes,
Europe,
exactly,
right?
on the Kelso Intitute of Europe. And this project actually implemented CSOPs in 4 pilot regions.
Where are they?
In Poland.
In Poland.
In Germany. In the Czech Republic. And in Italy.
In Italy, I see.
Right.
I see.
And we showed that CSOPs can actually be a vehicle to help citizens become co-owners together with micro-enterprises, with SMEs, with their municipalities, in order to become prosumers again.
Prosumers.
So normal people would suddenly become co-owners of renewable energy plants to produce the electricity or the heating or cooling that they consume themselves. And of course, this is also an incentive to be more energy efficient, because if they use less energy, they can either sell it to the market or share it with their peers or with their communities in turn.
How does it work? I mean, in those countries, is there any?
Well, these pilot projects are very different. So, for example, one of our Italian pilot projects, which is a hydropower plant, a very small hydropower plant of 20 kilowatt in a small village, that is a success. There are 40 families, a bakery and a school who are supplied with electricity from this little turbine, and they share the electricity through the public grid.
I see.
But then we also had another project in the Susa Valley where actually wood chips that remain as waste from production from wood processing are used to produce heat. And consumers would become co-owners of such.
Is that what? Let's fast forward to what Kelso means by what's the manifesto? Capitalism.
Manifesto? Yes. So the Kelso's ideas, when he conceived these ideas in the 1950s, he actually published a book in 1964 entitled The Capitalist Manifesto.
The Capitalist Manifesto.
It wasn't really his own title. He wasn't very happy with this title, but it was rather a title that the publisher wanted as a reply to the Communist Manifesto of Marx.
Karl Marx, yeah.
Yes, and actually, interestingly, Kelso was not against Marx, but he actually agreed to much of Marx's analysis. But he said there were a couple of flaws, and Karl Marx was almost a capitalist himself.
Almost capitalist to Kelso.
So says Kelso.
In what sense?
In the sense that his analysis was correct, but his solution was not exactly the one in Kelso's opinion. The way to solve this dilemma that capital is more and more concentrated, and that that normal people rely only on labor, and in order to by making more and more people co-owners of capital, of productive capital.
Not through revolution or...
No, well, let's take the example of, if you own your own apartment where you live, then that's already nice because you're independent, but that doesn't generate an income. But if you own, let's say, 2 or 3 apartments, and you can rent 2 of the 3 because you're living in one, then you can rent them, and then these apartments will produce an income for you. So the idea was to make people, to provide people with a second source of income.
Second source of income.
And that was actually income from capital ownership. And that's why he was convinced that you should broaden capital ownership as wide as possible. In order to also change these trends of concentration. And nowadays, the concentration of capital is peaking. It's more concentrated than ever. And actually, that's why these ideas are more urgent than ever.
Urgent
and interestingly, coming back to our previous discussion, Kelso also had a very philosophical thought here, because in his opinion, in order to be creative and to invent new things, you actually need leisure. Right, and leisure as the basis of culture, as Josef Pieper formulated in a seminal book. So
leisure is a basis for culture.
Yes, because if you think about when humans were living in the caves, we would probably still be in the caves if we didn't have leisure to invent music, the alphabet. Every cultural progress is actually the product of free time where you can think and have ideas and be creative. If you're working 16 hours in the mines or harrowing somewhere else, you're coming home and you're depleted. You're tired. You will not have creative ideas, but you just want to sleep.
So just like machine, it's not
exactly. So you need to free humankind from this toil in order to be inventive and creative. And the prerequisite for this kind of leisure is, of course, capital income and not only labor.
I see.
So that was the principal motivation of Kelso. And interestingly, Kelso was born in 1913. So as a teenager, he still lived through the Great Depression. And he saw that suddenly people were unemployed. They didn't have to eat. People were starving, basically. The whole economy collapsed, and he couldn't understand why. So that was the driver or the motivation for him to come up with these ideas.
Okay.
And I'm actually convinced that Kelso's ideas are today very urgent, and they should be discussed much more widely.
Sure. Because in developing countries like Indonesia, or the capital are centralized, owned by few people.
Yes, it's always the same story.
Same story. That's why the collective, pro-owners, pro-consumers, prosumers,
right.
Prosumers. That's very, very interesting ideas and really urgent for us.
And I think Indonesia is a perfect example with all these little islands. Energy is a problem.
Sure.
Some people are cut off from the grid, or you have diesel generators which are hideously expensive. So communities could become energy autonomous.
Right. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
To visit. It was a pleasure. Hopefully we can see each other again, whether in Berlin or in Indonesia.
I would very much look forward to that, indeed.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you.